My name is Sarah Carpenter. I'm 31 years old, and until 7 weeks ago, I was a high school math teacher living a quiet, normal life. On Tuesday morning, April 16th, at exactly 6:47 a.m., 3 federal agents knocked on my apartment door with a warrant. They were looking for someone who'd committed wire fraud, tax evasion, and identity theft across 4 states over 15 years. The person they were looking for had my name, my social security number, my date of birth, but when they scanned my driver's license and compared it to the photos in their file, the lead agent's face changed. He looked at me, then at his tablet, then back at me, and he said, "Ma'am, how old are you?" 31, I told him. He turned his tablet around. "According to this, you have been opening credit accounts since 2009. You would have been 16. I stared at the screen. 19 different credit cards, car loans, personal loans, addresses in 3 states I'd never visited. And at the bottom of the file, a Florida driver's license from 2018 with my name, my birth date, my social security number, and someone else's face. My mother's face. The agent asked me where Diane Carpenter was. I said, "That's my mother. I haven't seen her in about 3 months." He asked if I owned a Lexus. I said no. He showed me a purchase agreement for a 2019 Lexus EZ, financed in my name, shipped to an address in Tampa. I'd never been to Tampa. I'd never owned a car that cost more than $8,000. That's when he told me I had $340,000 in debt across 19 accounts, 2 active felony warrants, and a credit score of 430. I stood in my doorway in flannel pajamas and bare feet while 3 strangers photographed my ID, and I couldn't feel my hands. I kept thinking, this is a mistake. This is identity theft. Someone stole my information. And then the agent said, "Ma'am, we believe you're a victim, but we need you to come to our field office at 1 p.m. with documentation proving your identity and residence history for the past 15 years. I asked why. He said, "Because your mother has been living as you since you were 16 years old." Before I tell you how a federal prosecutor stood in a courtroom and used the word trafficking to describe what my mother did to me, before I tell you about the arrest, the trial, the 11-year prison sentence, I need you to understand something. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This wasn't desperation. This was systematic, deliberate, and it started the day I was born. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've ever had a family member steal from you, money, credit, opportunities, hit that subscribe button. Because what happened next is going to make you rethink everything you thought you knew about toxic families. The agent stood in my doorway and said, "Ma'am, do you have any idea how someone could have accessed your social security number, your passwords, your bank accounts?" I said, "No, I'm careful. I don't share that stuff." He nodded slowly. Then he asked, "Who has access to your personal documents? Birth certificate, social security card, tax records?" And that's when my stomach dropped. Because the answer was my mother. She'd kept all my documents for safekeeping since I was a teenager. Every time I asked for them, she'd say, "They're safer with me, sweetie. You'll lose them." And I believed her, because she was my mother, because I trusted her. The agent saw my face change. He said, "Ma'am, I think you need to sit down." But I couldn't sit. I couldn't move. Because in that moment, standing in my apartment hallway with 3 federal agents staring at me, I realized something I should have realized years ago. This wasn't the first time my mother had stolen from me. It was just the first time she'd gotten caught. I was 16 when my mother first helped me apply for a credit card. She said it was important to build credit early, that I'd thank her when I was older and trying to buy a car or rent an apartment. We sat at the kitchen table together, and she walked me through the application. Name, address, social security number. She knew it by heart. She said the card would arrive in 7 to 10 business days. It never arrived. When I asked about it 2 weeks later, she barely looked up from her coffee. "They denied you, sweetie. You don't have any credit history yet. We'll try again next year." I believed her. Why wouldn't I? 2 years later, I got into state university with a partial scholarship. I needed financial aid for the rest. My mother offered to help me fill out the FAFSA, said those forms were complicated, that I'd mess it up if I did it alone. I watched her type on her laptop for 20 minutes, asked if I should review it before she submitted, and she waved me off. "I've done this before with your brother, Sarah. I know what I'm doing." 3 weeks before classes started, I got a letter from the university. My acceptance had been rescinded. The financial aid office said my FAFSA had been flagged for fraudulent information, income discrepancies, false tax documents. They said I'd committed fraud. Me, I was 18 years old and I'd never even filed taxes. I showed my mother the letter. She read it, frowned, and said, "You must have entered something wrong when you were looking over my shoulder. These systems are so sensitive, Sarah. One wrong number and they think you're a criminal." I didn't look over her shoulder. I didn't touch that application. But she said it so calmly, so matter-of-factly, that I started to believe maybe I had made a mistake. Maybe I distracted her. Maybe this was my fault. I took a gap year, worked at her hair salon sweeping floors and washing towels for $9 an hour. When I finally got into community college the next year, using a different application system, filling it out myself in the library, I thought I'd left that nightmare behind. I spent 4 years getting my bachelor's degree, then 2 more getting my teaching credential. I worked part-time the entire time. I was careful with money. I didn't have credit cards because I was scared of debt. But things kept happening, small things, strange things. When I was 22, I applied for my first apartment. The landlord ran my credit and frowned. He said, "You have an eviction on your record, from Tampa, Florida, 3 years ago." I'd never been to Florida. I'd never even left California, except for one trip to Nevada. I told him it was a mistake, must have been identity theft. He said, "You should dispute that, but I can't rent to you with an eviction history." I called my mother from the parking lot, crying. She sighed like I was exhausting her. "Sarah, identity theft happens to everyone now. It's so common. Just file a dispute with the credit bureaus. They'll fix it." She made it sound easy, normal, like this was just bad luck. At 28, I got denied for a car loan. I'd been teaching for 3 years. I had a steady salary, $4,000 saved for a down payment. The banker looked uncomfortable. He said, "Ms. Carpenter, you have 34% credit utilization across 12 open accounts. Your debt-to-income ratio is too high." I only had one credit card, one with a $300 balance. He printed out my credit report and slid it across the desk. 12 cards I'd never opened. Balances I'd never charged, addresses I'd never lived at. I stared at that paper until the numbers blurred. The banker said, "You should really monitor your credit. This looks like long-term identity theft." I drove to my mother's house, showed her the report, asked if she had any idea how this could have happened. She looked at it for maybe 5 seconds. Then she said, "Sweetie, this is scary, but you can't let it control your life. Dispute the accounts, freeze your credit, move on. Don't let criminals make you paranoid." Criminals, plural, faceless strangers somewhere out there ruining my life. Never her. Here's what I didn't understand then. My mother had trained me since childhood not to ask questions. Every time something went wrong financially, she had an explanation that made me feel stupid for being suspicious. She'd raised me to believe that checking up on her help was the same as accusing her. That questioning her was cruel. My brother Derek never had these problems. Derek got his college paid for in full. Derek got a down payment for his first house as a graduation gift, $25,000 in cash. When I asked why I never got help like that, my mother said, "Derek needed it, Sarah. You've always been so independent. You don't need us the same way." Independent, that was her word for it. What she meant was, Derek's identity was protected. Mine wasn't. But I didn't know that yet. 3 months before those federal agents knocked on my door, my grandmother died. My father's mother, Patricia Carpenter. She was 87 years old, sharp as a knife until the very end, and she had never liked my mother. Not even a little bit. Growing up, I thought it was just typical in-law tension. My grandmother was cold to my mom at holidays, never called her, barely acknowledged her at family gatherings. My mother said Grandma Patricia was jealous, bitter, impossible to please. After my dad died when I was 3, a car accident on Highway 101, my grandmother tried to stay in my life. She'd call and ask to take me for weekends. My mother always had an excuse. "I'm busy. Sarah has homework. We have plans." Eventually, my grandmother stopped calling as much. By the time I was a teenager, I only saw her once or twice a year. I thought that was normal family drift. Turns out it wasn't drift at all. When my grandmother died in January, I got a call from a lawyer I'd never met. He said my grandmother had left me something in her will. He asked me to come to his office in San Luis Obispo the following week. I thought maybe it was jewelry, maybe a few $1,000s. It was $125,000. I sat in that lawyer's office with my hands shaking, staring at a cashier's check with my name on it. $125,000. It was more money than I'd ever seen in my life. It was a down payment on a house. It was financial security. It was everything I'd been clawing toward for a decade while my credit mysteriously crumbled around me. The lawyer said my grandmother had been very specific in her instructions. The money was for me, only me, not to be shared with my mother, not to be discussed with my mother. He said she'd updated her will 8 months before she died and added a note that said, "Sarah will need this to rebuild." Rebuild what? I didn't understand. But I took the check. I cried in my car for 20 minutes, and then I did something I hadn't done in 6 months. I called my mother. We'd been in a cold war since the previous summer. I'd started going to therapy, finally, and my therapist had suggested I try setting boundaries with my family. Small ones. Things like, I can't talk on the phone after 9 p.m., I have to wake up early for work. Or, I need a few days to think about that before I give you an answer. My mother responded to boundaries like I'd lit her house on fire. She stopped answering my calls, stopped replying to texts, sent my brother to tell me I was being difficult and hurting the family. When I showed up at her house to try to talk it out, she answered the door, looked at me like I was a stranger, and said, "I don't have time for this right now, Sarah." Then she closed the door in my face. So when my grandmother died and left me that money, part of me thought, maybe this is a reset. Maybe this is a chance to fix things. Maybe if I share this news with her, she'll soften. Maybe we can finally be okay. I called her from the lawyer's parking lot. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was warm, surprised. "Sarah, sweetie, hi, I wasn't expecting to hear from you." I told her about the will, about the money, about how Grandma Patricia had left it specifically to me. There was a pause. Then she said, "Oh, honey, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. You deserve something good after everything you've been through." Everything I'd been through. Like the financial chaos was something that had happened to me, not something that had been done to me. But I ignored that little voice in my head. Because for the first time in 6 months, my mother sounded like my mother. She asked if I wanted to come over for dinner that weekend. She said we should celebrate Grandma's life, that family was too important to let small disagreements tear us apart. She said she missed me. I said yes. I wanted so badly to believe her. That Saturday, I drove to her house with a bottle of wine and a box of pastries from the bakery she liked. My brother was there. So was Marcus, a man I'd only met twice, someone my mother introduced as a family friend, but who seemed to be around a lot lately. My mother hugged me at the door, a real hug, the kind she used to give me when I was little. Over dinner, she asked about my plans for the money. I said I wanted to pay off my credit card, maybe put a down payment on a small condo. Marcus nodded thoughtfully and said, "That's smart. Real estate is a good investment right now." Then my mother said, "You know, sweetie, you should talk to Marcus about the estate process. He's an estate attorney. He helps people navigate inheritance paperwork all the time." I looked at Marcus. He smiled, handed me a business card. It looked legitimate, embossed letters, a law office address in Paso Robles. He said, "$125,000 is a significant amount. If you don't handle it correctly, the IRS can take up to 40% in estate taxes and penalties. But if you move it into a temporary estate trust, account for the required holding period, you avoid all of that." I didn't know anything about estate taxes. I taught high school calculus. I had no idea what a trust account was. Marcus said the holding period was 60 days. He said it was standard procedure, that every inheritance over 100,000 had to go through this process. He had paperwork ready, official-looking documents with legal terms I didn't understand, but that sounded real. My mother sat across from me, smiling. She said, "Marcus has helped so many people with this, Sarah. He's really good at what he does." I wanted to ask more questions. I wanted to call the lawyer who'd given me the check and verify this, but my mother was being kind to me for the first time in months. My brother was nodding along. Marcus had a notary seal and letterhead. And I was so tired of being suspicious. So I signed the papers. I watched Marcus notarize them. He gave me a copy of the trust account statement, told me the money would be released on April 14th. 60 days exactal. Why? My mother hugged me again when I left. She said, "I'm so proud of you, baby. You're finally going to have the security you deserve. I drove home and let myself imagine a different life. A life where I wasn't drowning. A life where my credit wasn't a disaster. A life where I could breathe. I looked at condos online. I found a 2-bedroom with a balcony and hardwood floors, 10 minutes from the school where I taught. I bookmarked it. I let myself dream. It was March 14th, 2024, when I signed those papers. April 14th was release day. I counted down like it was Christmas morning. On April 15th, I woke up to 11 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. My teaching salary had been direct deposited the night before, $3,847. It was supposed to hit my account at midnight. When I checked my banking app at 6:30 a.m., my balance was $9.12. I called the bank. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. The fraud department rep said there had been 8 wire transfers processed between 2 and 4 a.m., all of them authorized with my password, my 2-factor authentication, from a registered device at my current location. I said that was impossible. I'd been asleep. My phone was on my nightstand the entire night. She said, "Ma'am, the device registry shows a laptop registered to this account in 2019. Is that yours?" I looked across my bedroom. There was an old laptop on my desk, one my mother had given me 3 years ago when she upgraded. She said I could use it for lesson planning since mine was slow. I barely touched it. It just sat there. My blood ran cold. The rep said the wire transfers had emptied my checking account and triggered an automatic draw from my savings. Another $2,000 gone. She said I needed to come into a branch immediately to file a fraud report. I said okay. I hung up, and that's when someone knocked on my door. 3 federal agents, badges out, warrant in hand. The lead agent, a woman in her 40s with dark hair pulled back tight, asked if I was Sarah Ann Carpenter. I said yes. She asked for my ID. I gave it to her. She scanned it with some kind of tablet device. Her expression changed. She looked at her partners, then back at me. She said, "Ma'am, how old are you?" That's when she showed me the file. 19 credit accounts I'd never opened. Car loans for vehicles I'd never seen. Personal loans with signatures that looked like mine but weren't. Addresses in Florida, Arizona, Texas, states I'd never lived in. And at the bottom of the screen, a Florida driver's license issued in 2018. My name, my birth date, my social security number. My mother's face. I stared at that picture. My mother, smiling slightly, wearing the blue blouse I'd given her for Christmas that year. The laminated card looked real, official, like she'd walked into a DMV, presented my documents, and they'd handed it to her without question. The agent said, "Ma'am, we have evidence of wire fraud, tax evasion, and aggravated identity theft spanning 15 years. We've been investigating Diane Carpenter and Marcus Delgado for 8 months. We believe you're a victim, but we need you to help us prove that." I couldn't speak, I couldn't move. She said, "According to our records, you have been opening accounts since 2009. You would have been 16. Did you open any credit accounts when you were 16? I shook my head. She said, "Did you file tax returns between 2009 and 2015? I said, "I didn't make enough to file until I was in grad school." She nodded, wrote something down. Then she said, "Ms. Carpenter, your mother has been filing tax returns in your name since you were 16 years old. She's been claiming income you never earned, taking refunds you never received, and opening credit accounts using your social security number for at least 15 years. The hallway tilted. I grabbed the doorframe. She said, "We need you to come to our field office at 1 p.m. today with every document you have proving your identity and residence for the past 15 years. Bank statements, leases, pay stubs, school records, anything that shows where you were and what you were actually doing." I said, "What about the inheritance? My grandmother's money. It was supposed to be released yesterday." The agent looked at her tablet again. She said, "We have records of a transfer on March 16th. $125,000 moved from an estate account into a shell company registered in Nevada. From there, it was divided into 8 wire transfers to accounts in Diane Carpenter's name, Marcus Delgado's name, and 4 accounts fraudulently opened in your name. The inheritance was gone. My salary was gone. 15 years of credit destroyed. $340,000 in debt I never created." I stood in my apartment doorway in pajamas, Well, a federal agent photographed my driver's license, and I started laughing. Gee, not happy laughing. The kind of laughing your body does when your brain can't process what's happening, when reality is so absurd that your nervous system short-circuits. The agent said, "Ma'am, are you okay?" I said I was going to call my mom. I was going to ask her what to do about the missing money. The agent's face softened. She said, "Ms. Carpenter, your mother is the primary suspect in an ongoing federal investigation. Do not contact her. Do not tell her we spoke. Do not warn her in any way. Do you understand?" I nodded. She handed me a business card. Special Agent Maritza Reyes, FBI Financial Crimes Division. She said, 1 p.m. bring everything. And Ms. Carpenter, I know this is devastating, but you're going to get through this. Then they left. I stood in my apartment hallway holding a business card and listening to my coffee maker beep in the kitchen. The world looked exactly the same as it had 20 minutes ago, but nothing was the same. My mother hadn't just stolen my inheritance. She'd been stealing my entire life. For 15 years. The agents left. I had 6 hours to find proof I existed. I sat on my kitchen floor in a puddle of spilled coffee. The mug had fallen when my hands stopped working, and I stared at my phone. I needed to call someone. I needed help. But who do you call when the person who destroyed your life is the person you've always called first? There was one person. Someone I'd kept at arm's length my entire adult life, because my mother always said she was bitter, jealous, dramatic. Someone who'd been cut off from family gatherings for years over what my mother called baseless accusations and attention-seeking. My Aunt Lisa, my father's younger sister. I hadn't spoken to her in almost 2 years, not because I didn't want to, but because my mother made it clear that staying close to Aunt Lisa meant choosing sides, and I was so tired of conflict, so I'd stopped returning her calls, stopped responding to her Facebook messages, let the relationship fade into silence. But sitting on that floor with my entire life in pieces around me, I realized something. Aunt Lisa had tried to warn me. Years ago, I must have been 19 or 20, she'd pulled me aside at a family funeral and asked if I was watching my credit, if I was checking my mail, if my mother had access to my documents. At the time, I thought she was stirring up drama. My mother had told me Aunt Lisa was paranoid, that she'd accused people of theft before and been proven wrong. But what if she hadn't been wrong? I called her. She answered on the first ring. Her voice was cautious. "Sarah." I said, "Mom stole my identity." There was a pause, not shock, not disbelief, just a long, sad exhale. And then she said, "Oh, honey, she's been doing this since you were born." Something inside me went quiet, not calm quiet, like the sound gets sucked out of a room right before an explosion. I stopped crying. My hands stopped shaking. I felt my face go cold. I said, "What do you mean, since I was born?" Aunt Lisa's voice cracked. "Your grandmother, your dad's mom, she caught your mother opening credit cards in your name when you were 6 months old. 6 months, Sarah, you were a baby." The floor felt like it was dropping out from under me. He kept talking. "Your grandma found the statements in your diaper bag. Your mother was babysitting you while your dad was deployed overseas. Patricia confronted her, and your mom broke down crying. Said she had postpartum depression, said she was desperate, said she'd made a terrible mistake and would never do it again. Your grandmother believed her. She paid off $8,000 in fraudulent charges to protect you, to protect the family. She made your mother promise to get help." I couldn't breathe. Aunt Lisa said, "But your mom didn't stop. She just got better at hiding it. When your dad died and your grandma tried to stay involved in your life, your mother iced her out, canceled visits, stopped answering calls, made it impossible for Patricia to check on you. And your grandma thought, she hoped, that maybe your mom had finally stopped. That grief had changed her." "But it didn't," I whispered. "No, it gave her more access, more control, no one to question her." I thought about all those years. The denied credit card at 16, the rescinded college acceptance, the eviction I never caused, the car loan I couldn't get. Every single financial roadblock in my life, it wasn't bad luck. It wasn't identity theft by strangers. It was her. It had always been her. Aunt Lisa said, "Your grandmother left you that money because she knew, Sarah. She told me 8 months before she died. She said, 'If Diane comes sniffing around when I'm gone, Lisa, you call the FBI.' She tried to put a protection clause in her will, something that would have kept your mom from accessing it, but she died before her lawyer could finalize it. My grandmother had known. She tried to protect me even from the grave, and my or had taken that money anyway, had used it as bait to steal even more. I felt something harden behind my sternum, something cold and sharp and final. I'd spent 15 years making excuses for my mother, believing her chaos was struggle, believing her cruelty was stress. I'd twisted myself into knots trying to be good enough, easy enough, understanding enough. But she wasn't struggling. She was hunting. And I'd been walking around with a target on my back since the day I was born. Aunt Lisa's voice was gentle. "Sarah, baby, I'm so sorry I didn't push harder to tell you, but your mom convinced everyone I was crazy. She cut me off from the family, said I was making things up because I was jealous of her. And I was afraid if I told you without proof, she'd isolate you completely. I didn't want to lose you too." I understood, I really did. I said, "Lisa, I need help. The FBI wants documentation. I have to be at their office at 1 p.m. She didn't hesitate. "I'm coming to you right now. I have something you need to see." I hung up. I looked around my apartment, at the life I'd built with my ruined credit and my stolen wages and my endless, stupid hope that one day my mother would see me as something other than a resource. I wanted to call her. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand answers. But Aunt Lisa's words echoed in my head. "If you tip her off, she'll disappear. You'll never get justice." So I didn't call. I got cold. I stopped crying. I made a list of every document I had. I started gathering evidence. And I decided, right there on my coffee-stained kitchen floor, that my mother had stolen from me for the last time. Aunt Lisa arrived 40 minutes later with a cardboard file box that looked like it had been sitting in a closet for years. She set it on my kitchen table, and I saw my father's name written on the side in faded Sharpie. David Carpenter, Financial Records, 2001-2003. My dad had been dead for 28 years. Why did Aunt Lisa have his financial records? She opened the box. Inside were credit card statements, collection notices, and bank records, all in my father's name, all dated after he died. I looked up at her. "I don't understand." She pulled out a stack of papers. "Your mother did this to your dad first. While he was deployed overseas in 2002, she opened 4 credit cards in his name. By the time he came home, she'd racked up $23,000 in debt. He didn't even know until a collections agency called his base." I felt sick. Aunt Lisa kept going. "He was trying to sort it out when he died in the accident. After the funeral, your grandma started getting collection calls at her house, companies looking for your dad, saying he owed money. Patricia started investigating. That's when she found out the cards were still active, still being used. 2 years after your dad was dead, your mother was still charging things in his name." She handed me a credit card statement from December 2003. Charges at department stores, restaurants, gas stations. My father had been dead since May 2001. "Your grandma confronted her," Aunt Lisa said. "Your mom cried, said she didn't know the cards were still active, said it was an accident. Patricia didn't believe her. She threatened to go to the police. That's when your mom started icing her out. That's when she stopped letting your grandma see you." I thought about all those years, how my grandmother had slowly faded from my life, how my mother always had an excuse for why we couldn't visit, how I believed it was just natural family distance. It wasn't distance, it was containment. Aunt Lisa reached into the box again. This time, she pulled out an envelope. It was addressed to me in my grandmother's handwriting. "She gave this to me 6 months before she died," Aunt Lisa said. "She told me to give it to you if Diane ever came after the inheritance." My hands were shaking as I opened it. The letter was dated September 2023, 4 months before my grandmother died. "Sarah, if you're reading this, Diane has finally done to you what she did to your father. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I tried. I paid off the cards when you were a baby. I hoped she'd changed. I hoped becoming a mother would be enough. But people like Diane don't change. They just find new victims. I'm giving you the tools to protect yourself now. I already called the FBI. I gave them everything I have. I told them to watch her, to build a case. I'm setting a trap with this inheritance, Sarah. If she can't resist it, it'll be enough to get federal attention. I just hope I live long enough to see her caught. You are not responsible for fixing her. You are not required to forgive her. You are allowed to save yourself. I love you. I'm sorry I failed you. Grandma Patricia." Attached to the letter with a paper clip was a business card. "Special Agent Maritza Reyes." FBI Financial Crimes Division. The same agent who knocked on my door that morning. I looked at Aunt Lisa. Grandma called. The FBI 8 months ago. She nodded. She contacted them in November. Gave them copies of everything, your dad's records, the credit report from when you were a baby, documentation of every time you've been denied credit or loans. She told them Diane was a serial financial predator. She told them to watch for the inheritance. My grandmother had died in January. She'd been gone for 3 months, but she'd already set this in motion. She'd built the case before I even knew there was a crime. At 12:45 p.m., I walked into the FBI field office in downtown San Luis Obispo with Aunt Lisa beside me and a backpack full of documents. 15 years of pay stubs, lease agreements, teaching contracts, college transcripts, bank statements. Every piece of paper that proved I was who I said I was. Agent Maritza Reyes met us in a small conference room. She wasn't alone. There was a man in a suit, late 40s, graying at the temples, who introduced himself as Assistant U.S. Attorney Robert Chen, a federal prosecutor. Agent Reyes gestured for us to sit. She said, "Ms. Carpenter, your grandmother contacted our office 8 months ago with allegations of long-term identity fraud. We've been building a case against Diane Carpenter and Marcus Delgado since November. You're not the only victim, but you are the primary victim." I said, "What does that mean?" Attorney Chen leaned forward. "It means your mother isn't an opportunistic thief, Ms. Carpenter. She's a serial financial predator. In my 11 years as a federal prosecutor, I've seen this pattern in human trafficking cases. Your mother trafficked your identity the way traffickers move victims, systematic, long-term exploitation with economic control." The word hung in the air. "Trafficked," he continued. "We have evidence of wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, tax evasion, and conspiracy. Wire fraud alone carries up to 20 years. Aggravated identity theft is a mandatory 2-year sentence. Tax evasion can add another 5. We're looking at multiple felonies across state lines, which gives us federal jurisdiction." I pulled out my notebook. I didn't cry. I didn't break down. I took notes. I said, "What's the maximum sentence if she's convicted?" Agent Reyes said, "Realistically, 10 to 15 years in federal prison." I wrote that down. I said, "Can I sue her civilly while the criminal case is active?" Attorney Chen nodded. "Yes, in fact, I'd recommend it. Civil asset forfeiture can help you recover anything she purchased with stolen funds." I said, "How long until you arrest her?" Agent Reyes glanced at the prosecutor. "We're 6 to 8 weeks out. We need to finish tracing the inheritance transfers and coordinate with IRS investigators. A forensic accountant is working on reconstructing every fraudulent account." I said, "What do I do until then?" She said, "Act normal. If your mother contacts you, be cordial. Don't accuse. Don't confront. Let her think everything is fine. Let her think the inheritance scam worked. Can you do that?" I thought about my mother's texts from that morning, the ones I hadn't answered yet. "Hey, sweetie, how's the condo search?" I said, "Yes, I can do that." Agent Reyes studied me for a moment. Then she said, "You're holding up better than most victims at this stage. That'll help in court. Juries trust controlled testimony." I wasn't holding up, I was holding on. There's a difference. But I didn't tell her that. We spent 3 hours in that office. I handed over every document. I answered every question. I signed victim impact forms and evidence release waivers. When we finally left, it was almost 5 p.m. Aunt Lisa drove me home. We didn't talk much. What was there to say? When I got back to my apartment, I checked my phone. 7 new texts from my mother. "Hey, sweetie. How's the condo search? Marcus said the estate fund should release next week. There was a delay with the bank. Nothing to worry about. Just a processing issue. Love you. Call me when you get a chance." So she was still playing the game, still pretending Marcus was legitimate, still pretending she hadn't already stolen everything. I stared at those messages for a long time. Then I typed back, "No problem, just excited to finally have some stability. Love you too." I hit send. And then I called Aunt Lisa. I said, "You told me Grandma knew, but there's something else, isn't there? Something you haven't told me yet." There was a long pause. Then she said, "Yes, there's more, but Sarah, it's going to hurt." I said, "Everything hurts. Tell me anyway." Aunt Lisa told me to sit down. I was already sitting, but I gripped the edge of my kitchen table anyway. She said, "Your mother has been opening accounts in your name since you were 11 months old." 11 months. Not 16, not 10, 11 months old. I couldn't speak. Aunt Lisa's voice was steady, but I could hear the anger underneath. "Your grandmother kept records. I have a credit report from 1994, ITSH. I was an account opened in November 1993 in the name of Sarah Ann Carpenter. Your birth date is January 8th, 1993. You were 10 months old when that account was opened. 11 months when the first charges appeared." I felt something crack open in my chest, not heartbreak, clarity. My entire life, all 31 years of it, had been a crime scene. Aunt Lisa kept going. "Your grandma didn't just suspect, Sarah. She had proof. When she paid off those cards in 1994, she made copies of everything. She confronted your mother with a credit report that showed a baby had $8,000 in debt, and your mom looked her in the eye and said she'd made a mistake. That postpartum depression made her desperate, that it would never happen again." "But it did," I whispered. "It never stopped. Your mother looked at you as a newborn and saw a social security number. She's been farming you for 30 years. Farming, that word again, like I was a crop, a resource to be harvested. I thought about my childhood. Every birthday card from relatives that my mother put in savings for me, every cash gift that disappeared. The part-time job I had at 15, how my mother convinced me to open a joint bank account so she could help me save, and how that money always seemed to vanish before I could use it. I thought I was bad with money. I thought I was irresponsible. But I'd never had a chance. She'd been stealing from me since before I could walk." Aunt Lisa said, "There's something else, about Derek. My brother, the golden child, the one who got everything while I got lectures about independence." "Derek isn't the golden child," Aunt Lisa said. "He's the protected child." I didn't understand. She explained, "When your dad died, he and your mom were separated. Did you know that?" I didn't. Nobody had ever told me that. "Your dad had primary custody of Derek. He was staying with your grandma while your dad was deployed. When your dad died, there was a custody battle. Your grandma wanted Derek. Your mother fought her for him and won. But by then, your dad had already locked Derek's social security number in a military family security system. It's a protection program for dependents of active service members. Your mom couldn't access it. She couldn't steal Derek's identity even if she wanted to." The room tilted. "Derek's financial success is real," Aunt Lisa said. "He really did graduate debt-free. He really did get help with his house, because your mother couldn't use him the way she used you. So she gave him the money she stole from you and called it generosity. My brother didn't know. He had no idea. He thought he was loved more. He thought he'd earned it. But he was just protected by a dead man's foresight. I was the one left exposed." Aunt Lisa's voice softened. "Your grandmother tried to do the same thing for you. After your dad died, she tried to get custody. She wanted to protect you the way she'd protected Derek. But you were only 3. Your mother was your biological parent. The court sided with her. And Patricia spent the next 28 years watching your mother destroy you and being powerless to stop it." I thought about my grandmother, how she'd tried to stay in my life, how she'd called and visited and sent cards, how my mother had slowly, methodically cut her off, how by the time I was a teenager, I barely knew her. My mother hadn't just stolen my money. She'd stolen my protection. She'd isolated me from the one person who knew what she was and could have saved me. "The inheritance was a test," Aunt Lisa said. "Your grandma told me," she said, "if Diane can resist $125,000, I'll know she's changed. But if she takes it, it'll be enough to trigger a federal investigation. Either way, Sarah wins. Either her mother has reformed or her mother gets caught." My grandmother had set a trap, and my mother had walked right into it. But my grandma hadn't lived to see it spring. I said, "How long have you known all of this?" Aunt Lisa hesitated. "I've known about your dad since 2003. I've known about you since your grandma showed me that credit report in 2011. You were 18. I wanted to tell you, Sarah. I tried to warn you at Uncle Mike's funeral, remember? But your mom had already poisoned the family against me. She told everyone I was jealous, bitter, that I made up lies for attention. And I was terrified that if I told you without proof, she'd cut you off completely. She'd already done it to your grandma. I didn't want her to do it to me, too, because then you'd have no one." I understood. I hated it, but I understood. She'd been watching me drown for over a decade, knowing exactly what was happening, and unable to throw me a rope without my mother cutting the line. "I'm sorry," she said, and her voice broke. "I should have told you anyway. I should have risked it, but I was a coward and you paid for it." I said, "You're here now. That's what matters." We sat in silence for a moment, and my phone buzzed. A text from Agent Ray's. Update. Forensic accountant completed preliminary trace. Total fraudulent debt in your name, $340,000 across 19 accounts. Total stolen income including inheritance, $287,000 over 15 years. Recoverable assets identified, approximately $89,000. More details when we meet next week. I read it twice, then I read it again. $287,000. Stolen over 15 years, that was $19,000 a year, $1,600 a month. Every single month for 15 years, my mother had been siphoning money from my life. And I'd never noticed because I thought I was just bad at being an adult. I showed the text to Aunt Lisa. She read it and her jaw tightened. She said, "Are you okay?" I looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who'd been exiled from her own family for trying to tell the truth, who'd kept evidence for decades, who'd driven to my apartment the second I called. I said, "I'm not okay, but I'm going to be. Because in 6 weeks, federal agents are going to knock on my mother's door, and I'm going to be there to watch." Aunt Lisa's expression shifted. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. She said, "You're David's daughter. He'd be so proud of you." I didn't cry, I didn't fall apart. I just nodded. Because my mother had spent 30 years teaching me that I was weak, that I needed her, that I couldn't survive without her guidance. But she was wrong. I'd survived despite her. And now I was going to make sure she faced every single consequence she'd spent 3 decades outrunning. 6 weeks later, on a Thursday morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Agent Ray's. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. your mother's house. Arrest warrant approved. Do you want to be there?" I'd imagined this moment for 42 days. I thought I'd want to scream at her, to make her look at what she'd done, to force her to see me as a person instead of a resource. But when I typed my response, my hands were completely steady. Yes, I'll be there. Because I didn't need to scream anymore. I just needed to watch her face when she realized she'd finally been caught. Friday morning, May 24th, 2024, 10 a.m. I parked across the street from my mother's house with Aunt Lisa in the passenger seat. We were early. The FBI wasn't supposed to arrive for another 7 minutes. My mother's house looked exactly the same as it always did. Beige stucco, terracotta roof tiles, the garden gnome by the mailbox that she thought was charming and I'd always found vaguely creepy. There was a Lexus in the driveway, the one financed in my name, the one I'd never driven. Aunt Lisa said, "You don't have to watch this. We can leave right now." I shook my head. I need to see it. At 9:58 a.m., 2 black SUVs turned onto the street. No sirens, no flashing lights. They pulled up in front of the house, quiet and efficient. Agent Ray's stepped out first. 3 other agents followed. One of them carried a battering ram, just in case. They walked up the driveway. Agent Ray's knocked. My mother answered in her bathrobe, coffee mug in hand. Even from across the street, I could see the annoyed expression on her face. She hated being interrupted before noon. Agent Ray's held up her badge. I couldn't hear what she said, but I knew the words by heart. I'd imagined them 1,000 times. "Deanne Carpenter, I'm Special Agent Maritza Ray's, FBI Financial Crimes Division. We have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, tax evasion, and conspiracy." My mother's face went through a series of expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, then something that almost looked like amusement, like this was a prank she hadn't figured out yet. She said something. I saw her gesture with the coffee mug, shaking her head. Agent Ray's didn't move, just kept talking. I watched my mother's face shift again, confusion turning into deflection. She pointed inside the house, probably blaming Marcus, probably saying she didn't know, probably playing the victim. That's when Agent Ray's gestured toward the street. Toward me. My mother followed her hand. She looked across the street, and she saw me standing on the sidewalk next to Aunt Lisa. For 3 seconds, her face went completely blank. Then every muscle in her face went slack. Not sadness, not shock, recognition. She knew. She knew I'd been the one who turned her in. She knew this wasn't random. She knew her daughter had built the case that put federal agents on her doorstep. And for 1 second, just one, I saw her see me as something other than a resource. She saw me as a threat. I didn't say a word, I didn't cry, I didn't wave. I just stood there with my arms crossed and watched. Agent Reyes said something else. My mother's attention snapped back. She started talking faster, gesturing more frantically. The coffee mug sloshed. Then a second SUV pulled into the driveway, blocking it completely. 2 more agents got out. They walked around the side of the house toward the garage apartment. That's where Marcus had been living the entire time, in the garage apartment, 30 feet from my mother's back door. They brought him out in handcuffs 2 minutes later. He wasn't wearing a shirt. His hair was sticking up. He looked like he'd just woken up. My mother saw him and her face crumpled. She started crying. Big, heaving sobs. The kind of crying she used to do when she wanted sympathy, when she wanted someone to rescue her. But Agent Reyes didn't care. She pulled out handcuffs. My mother said something. I saw her mouth moving, saw her shaking her head violently. She reached toward Agent Reyes like she was going to grab her arm. Another agent stepped in, gently but firmly moving my mother's hands behind her back. The handcuffs clicked. My mother turned her head, looked directly at me again, and her face did something I'd never seen before. The tears stopped, just stopped, mid-sob. Her expression went completely flat, empty. She stared at me with nothing, no love, no hate, no anger, no recognition. Just cold calculation. Like she was looking at a bank account that had finally closed, a revenue stream that had dried up. I'd stopped being profitable, so I'd stopped being her daughter. Aunt Lisa whispered, "Are you okay?" I said, "I'm perfect." And I meant it. Agents were carrying boxes out of the house now. Laptops, file folders, a small safe. One of them held up a plastic evidence bag. I could see a laminated card inside, the Florida driver's license. My name, her face. A neighbor came out onto her porch, then another. Within 2 minutes, 4 people were standing outside watching federal agents arrest my mother in her bathrobe. My mother saw them, and I watched her realize what this meant. It wasn't just the arrest, it wasn't just the charges. It was the witnesses, the publicity, the humiliation. For a narcissist, that's worse than prison. They put her in the back of the SUV. Through the tinted window, I could see her head turning, scanning the street, looking at the neighbors, looking at me. Her lips were moving, she was saying something. I didn't need to hear it, I knew what she was saying. She was already planning her story, already figuring out how to spin this, how to make herself the victim, how to blame someone else. But it didn't matter anymore. Because there were federal agents, and evidence bags, and a prosecutor who called what she did trafficking. Her story didn't matter. The truth did. Marcus was loaded into the second SUV. The agents finished carrying out evidence. Agent Reyes walked across the street to where Aunt Lisa and I were standing. She said, "Ms. Carpenter, I wanted you to see this. You deserve to see this." I nodded. I didn't trust my voice yet. She said, "We'll be in touch next week about trial preparation. But I want you to know we have everything we need. This is a solid case. She's not getting out of this." I said, "Thank you." Agent Reyes looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "You're stronger than she ever gave you credit for." The SUVs pulled away. My mother's house stood empty, front door still open, coffee mug abandoned on the porch railing. Aunt Lisa said, "Do you want to go inside? Look around." I looked at that house. I'd spent so much of my childhood there, so many Christmases and birthdays and ordinary Tuesdays. I'd sat at that kitchen table doing homework. I'd slept in the guest room during college breaks. I'd believed it was home. But it had never been home. It had been a crime scene, and I'd been the evidence. I said, "No, there's nothing in there I want." We got in the car. Aunt Lisa drove us to a diner 3 miles away. We ordered coffee and sat in a booth by the window, and neither of us said anything for a long time. Then I opened my email. The forensic accountant had sent a preliminary report that morning. Subject line, Asset Recovery Analysis. I clicked it open. Total fraudulent debt, in victim's name, $340,000. Total stolen income, 15 years, $287,000. Identified assets purchased with stolen funds. 2019 Lexus ES 350, $47,000 current value. Jewelry estate appraisal, $18,000. Home equity, fraudulent cash-out refinance 2021, $24,000. Total recoverable, $89,000. Criminal charges filed, wire fraud 3 counts, aggravated identity theft 12 counts, tax evasion 8 counts, conspiracy 2 counts. Estimated sentencing range, 10-15 years federal prison. I read it twice. Then I set my phone down and looked out the window at the ordinary Friday morning traffic. People going to work. People living normal lives where their mothers hadn't spent 30 years stealing their existence. Aunt Lisa said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it, really thought about it. I said, "I feel like I can finally breathe." And for the first time in 43 days, maybe for the first time in 31 years, I smiled. The legal system moves slowly, painfully slowly. My mother was held without bail. The prosecutor argued she was a flight risk. They'd found a passport in my name with her photo during the house search. The judge agreed. Marcus Delgado took a plea deal 3 weeks after the arrest. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he testified against my mother. He confirmed everything. The fake estate attorney scheme, the shell company in Nevada, the wire transfers. He gave them dates, account numbers, email trails. He got 4 years in federal prison. My mother got a trial date, November 18, 2024. 6 months away. For 6 months, my life was frozen. I couldn't apply for new credit. Everything was tied up in the investigation. I couldn't fix my credit score. I couldn't move forward because I was stuck in the legal process, waiting for the system to decide whether my mother had actually destroyed my life or whether I was just exaggerating. I went to therapy twice a week. My therapist gave me a term for what I was experiencing: complex betrayal trauma. She said it was common in cases of prolonged abuse by a trusted caregiver. She said the financial aspect made it worse because it was so tangible. Every time I checked my credit report, I was looking at evidence of my own victimization. I kept teaching. I showed up every day, taught polynomial functions and trigonometric identities, graded papers, stayed late for tutoring. My students had no idea their teacher was the primary witness in a federal fraud case. Normal life on the surface, legal warfare underneath. The trial started on November 18th as scheduled. It was supposed to last 2 weeks. It lasted 3 days. On day 1, the prosecutor presented the evidence: financial records going back 30 years, the 1994 credit report showing an 11-month-old with debt, tax returns filed in my name while I was in high school, the Florida driver's license, account applications with forged signatures, wire transfer receipts from the inheritance theft. On day 2, Marcus testified. He described how my mother had recruited him, how she'd presented the inheritance scam as a business opportunity, how he'd known it was fraud but participated anyway. Then I testified. I sat in that witness box for 4 hours and walked the jury through my entire life. The denied credit card at 16, the rescinded college acceptance, the eviction I never caused, the car loan I couldn't get. The morning federal agents knocked on my door. The prosecutor asked me, "Did you ever suspect your mother was responsible?" I said no, she taught me to trust her. And every time something went wrong, she had an explanation that made me feel stupid for questioning it. He asked, what was the worst part? I thought about it. Then I said, realizing that every time I failed, every time I couldn't afford something or got denied for something, she'd been the reason. And she'd watched me blame myself. On day 3, the prosecutor showed the jury the Florida driver's license. My name, my birth date, my social security number, my mother's face. He held it up and said, "This isn't identity theft. This is identity trafficking." Then he said something I'll never forget. We traffic people for labor. We traffic them for sex. We traffic them for organs. Diane Carpenter trafficked her daughter's identity for profit. For 30 years, Sarah Carpenter's entire existence was currency. She wasn't a daughter. She was a product. That's not a crime of opportunity. That's systematic human exploitation. My mother's lawyer objected, said the term trafficking was inflammatory and prejudicial. The judge overruled it. She said, the prosecutor's characterization is supported by the evidence. Objection denied. At lunch on day 3, my mother's lawyer approached the prosecutor. They talked for 20 minutes. When court resumed, my mother pled guilty. All charges, wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, tax evasion, conspiracy. She didn't fight anymore. The evidence was too overwhelming. The jury was already on my side. Her lawyer knew she'd get a harsher sentence if she forced a conviction. So she pled guilty and hoped for mercy. Sentencing was scheduled for January 14th, 2025. 2 months later, I walked back into that courtroom. My mother sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit. She'd lost weight. Her hair was grayer. She looked smaller than I remembered. The prosecutor recommended 12 years. The defense asked for 5. Before the judge decided, I got to read my victim impact statement. I stood at the podium with a printed copy, but I didn't need it. I'd memorized every word. I said, I don't have a mother. I have a woman who gave birth to me and spent 30 years harvesting my existence. She didn't steal my credit card. She stole my ability to build a life. Every apartment I couldn't rent. Every loan I couldn't get. Every opportunity I lost because my credit was destroyed, those weren't accidents. Those were her. I looked directly at her. She didn't look back. I said, I'll spend next 10 years rebuilding, clearing fraudulent accounts, fixing tax records, proving I'm a real person. She'll spend 11 years in federal prison. That math feels fair. Then my mother's lawyer handed her a piece of paper. She stood up. She read from it in a flat, mechanical voice. I struggle with mental health issues that affected my judgment. I was under financial stress and made poor decisions. I hope someday Sarah can forgive me and we can rebuild our relationship. Not I'm sorry for what I did to you. Not I destroyed your life and I take full responsibility. Just passive voice, mental health, stress, poor decisions. She never looked at me, not once. The judge set the paper down and stared at my mother for a long time. Then she said, Ms. Carpenter, in 19 years on this bench, I have never seen a parent systematically exploit a child from infancy to adulthood with this level of premeditation. You didn't have a lapse in judgment. You had a business model, and your daughter was the product. She sentenced my mother to 11 years in federal prison, 5 years supervised release after that, $562,000 in restitution. 11 years. My mother would be 68 when she got out. I'd be 42. The bailiff led her away. She still didn't look at me. But my brother did. Derek had been sitting in the back of the courtroom. I hadn't known he was there until I turned around and saw him. After the sentencing, he waited for me in the hallway. He said, I didn't know, Sarah. I swear to God I didn't know. I believed him. He looked destroyed. He said, I thought she just loved me more. I thought I'd earned it. But I didn't earn anything. She just couldn't steal from me. I said, it's not your fault. He shook his head. But I benefited. That down payment she gave me for my house, that was probably your money. The college tuition, your money. I've been living off what she stole from you for years. I didn't know what to say to that. He said, I'm paying half the restitution. I already talked to my lawyer. I'm liquidating investments. I'm selling some things. I don't care how long it takes. You're getting that money back. I started crying, not sad crying, relief crying. Because my brother, who could have walked away, who could have pretended he didn't know, who could have protected his own assets, chose me. Chose accountability. Chose family, real family. The kind built on respect, not blood. Over the next 6 months, the legal system dismantled my mother's financial life. The Lexus was seized and sold at auction. The jewelry was recovered and liquidated. The house went into foreclosure. It had been purchased with a fraudulent cash-out refinance using my credit. The IRS cleared my tax record. 14 of the 19 fraudulent credit accounts were removed from my report. 5 were still in dispute, but my credit score climbed from 430 to 598. It wasn't fixed, but it was fixable. Every month, I received a restitution check. Sometimes it was $400 from my mother's prison wages. She made $1.47 an hour working in the prison laundry. Sometimes it was $3,000 from Derek's voluntary payments. It would take years to recover what she'd stolen, maybe decades. But I was recovering. And she was in a cell in Victorville Federal Prison, 300 miles away, where she couldn't touch me anymore. 18 months later, June 2026, I'm sitting on the balcony of my condo, watching the sunset over San Luis Obispo. The 2-bedroom with hardwood floors. The one I bookmarked back in March 2024 when I thought my grandmother's inheritance would save me. It did save me, just not the way I'd imagined. My credit score is 712. Not perfect, but good enough. Good enough to qualify for a mortgage. Good enough to prove I'm a real person with a real financial history. I bought this place 4 months ago with money I actually earned. Money no one stole. It's the first thing I've ever owned that's completely mine. I'm still teaching. Actually, I'm not just teaching anymore. I got promoted to department head last fall. Better pay, better benefits, an office with my name on the door. My students still have no idea their math teacher spent 2 years as the primary witness in a federal trafficking case. They just know I'm the teacher who stays late for tutoring and actually listens when they're struggling. I like it that way. My life looks quiet from the outside, normal, maybe even boring. But I built it, every single piece of it, and no one can take it from me. Aunt Lisa comes over for dinner every Sunday. Derek joins us twice a month. He lives 3 hours away, but he makes the drive. We've gotten closer in the past year and a half than we were in the previous 30 years combined. He's still paying restitution. He set up an automatic transfer, $1,500 a month, directly into my AC. Counts, he didn't have to do that. The court only required my mother to pay. But he said, I benefited from what she did to you. That makes me responsible too. That's the difference between real family and the family I grew up in. Real family takes accountability. Real family shows up. Real family doesn't keep score or demand repayment for basic decency. I'm dating someone. His name is Michael. He's a librarian. When I told him my story, the whole story on our 4th date, I watched his face carefully. I was ready for him to make an excuse and disappear. Instead, he said, "That's the most horrific thing I've ever heard. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Do you want to talk about it, or would you rather I just listen?" He didn't run, he didn't minimize it. He didn't say, "But she's still your mom." He just saw me and stayed. I still go to therapy twice a month. Probably will for a while. My therapist says I'm doing the work, learning to trust people again, learning that protecting myself isn't selfish, learning that I deserved better than what I got. Some days are harder than others. Last month I got a letter from my mother. It was forwarded from the prison. She'd written 6 pages. 6 pages of explanations and justifications and complaints about prison conditions. At the end she wrote, "I hope you'll come visit me. I miss you. I love you. We're still family." I read it once, then I put it in the shredder. Because here's what I've learned, the hardest lesson I've ever had to learn. The people who hurt you most are the ones who taught you that protecting yourself is betrayal. My mother raised me to believe that boundaries were selfish, that questioning her was cruelty, that protecting my own resources was abandonment. She trained me to be the perfect victim, and it almost worked. I spent 30 years thinking love meant letting people take from you. Thinking family meant enduring abuse. Thinking forgiveness meant letting someone hurt you over and over again while you pretended it didn't destroy you. But that's not love, that's not family. That's just control with a prettier name. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, even if that person is your mother. Even if she gave birth to you. Even if she cries and says you're destroying the family. You are allowed to save yourself. You are allowed to call crime, crime, even when it's committed by someone you love. You are allowed to choose peace over blood relation. The family I have now, Aunt Lisa, Derek, Michael, even some of my colleagues who have become real friends, that's the family I choose. The family built on respect, not obligation. Built on safety, not genetics. Derek and I talk about our childhood sometimes, about how we grew up in the same house but lived completely different realities. He's working through his own guilt in therapy, learning that he wasn't complicit, but he still benefited from a system designed to exploit me. We're figuring it out together, building something new. Last week, one of my students stayed after class. She's 17, bright kid, scholarship potential. She said, "Ms. Carpenter, my mom wants access to my bank account. She says it's so she can help me save for college, but something feels wrong. Is that normal?" I looked at her, really looked at her. And I said, "No, that's not normal. Your money is yours. If she wants to help you save, she can teach you how, but your account should be in your name only. Don't give anyone access to your finances, not even family, especially not family." She looked relieved, like she needed permission to trust her instincts. I gave her the number for a financial counselor at the college. I told her to open her own account. I told her that protecting herself wasn't mean. Maybe I saved her from what happened to me, maybe I didn't. But I tried. Because that's the only good thing that came from 30 years of exploitation. I know the warning signs now. I know what predatory love looks like, and I can help other people see it before it destroys them. The prosecutor called what my mother did trafficking. For months, I thought that was hyperbole, legal language designed to make the crime sound worse than it was. But it wasn't hyperbole. Trafficking is exploitation for profit. Trafficking is treating a human being like a resource. Trafficking is making someone believe they don't own themselves. That's exactly what she did. For 30 years, I was trafficked by the woman who was supposed to protect me. My identity, my credit, my future, none of it belonged to me. It all belonged to her. And it took federal agents and my dead grandmother to set me free. I don't talk to my mother anymore. I don't visit her. I don't take her calls. People ask me sometimes if I'll ever forgive her, if I'll reconcile when she gets out of prison in 9.5 years. I tell them the truth. Forgiveness isn't the same thing as reconciliation. I can forgive someone and still never let them harm me again. I forgive her for being broken, for being incapable of seeing me as a person instead of a resource. But I will never give her access to my life again. Because I finally understand, I am not responsible for fixing her. I am not required to sacrifice myself on the altar of her dysfunction. I am not obligated to light myself on fire just because she's cold. I own my name now. I own my credit. I own my future. I own my story. She can't touch any of it. And that's the only revenge I ever needed. The sun is setting over the hills. My coffee's getting cold. In a few minutes, Aunt Lisa will knock on my door with takeout from the Thai place we like, and we'll eat dinner on this balcony and talk about normal things. Work, weather, the book she's reading. Normal life, the kind I never thought I'd have. The kind I built from the ruins of what she destroyed. And it's mine. All mine. If you're watching this and someone in your life is stealing from you, your money, your credit, your opportunities, your peace, I need you to hear this. That's a crime. You're not overreacting. You're not being cruel. You're protecting yourself. And you deserve that protection. Tell me in the comments, what's one boundary you set that someone called selfish? I'll be reading every single one. And I want you to know you're not alone. You're not crazy. And you're not the villain in your own story. Even if they spent your whole life trying to make you believe you are. You deserve safety. You deserve peace. You deserve a life that's yours. And you're allowed to fight for it. Even if it means walking away from the people who taught you that fighting back was betrayal. Especially then,